Welcome to The Hype Within, exploring journeys of authentic leadership and growth. On the show, tech leaders will share their stories of developing their leadership skills and challenges they faced along the way. You'll learn about their approaches to self-reflection and personal growth, and how they've been able to build a foundation of authenticity that has propelled them to success. I'm your host, Hana Jacover, B2B marketing leader turned leadership and executive coach. Are you ready to get hyped up? Let's dive in. Okay, hey leaders, welcome back to The Hype Within. Today, I am joined by Alex Mislan, and I'm really excited because I've been following Mason Cosby for a while. LinkedIn, shout out Mason. He's always sharing the best stuff. And I don't know when it was, maybe a couple months back, he's like, hey, who wants these badass women on their podcast? And I'm like, yes, I do. Yes, please. And, here we are with Alex Mislan, who's the VP of Product Strategy at Sales Assembly. And I'm so happy that this was a referral. We're sitting here. We're going to have a great conversation. How are you?
Yeah, so good. So excited. Thanks so much for having me. Mason's just the best. So appreciate the vote of confidence. He knows that I'm weird about these kind of things. And it's hard for me to get into the space of thought leadership or that I should be on a podcast. But I really appreciate him for the nomination. It's really fun to chat about all of this stuff and get to know people.
Yes. Okay. So when you say you're weird about this kind of stuff, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think thought leadership for me has always been a really interesting space. I'm not one that's real outward facing on LinkedIn. I love to share and help people, but I just have never really gotten into the broad social aspect of it. So opportunities like this for me are always exciting and scary at the same time, where it's I feel kind of confident in what I do and what I share with a colleague, but maybe not ready to tell the world. And I know there's judgment behind that. But at the same time, I think I'm trying to get of my skin a little bit from that to just share what's working for me. And hopefully there's some value in that for someone else to be able to take from. And even if it's just one person that resonates, it's better for me to be here than not be here.
Yes, I love it. And I appreciate you sitting in the intersection of fear and excitement because, that's how you do it. That's how you move past all that bullshit around, imposter syndrome. But it's real. I don't believe imposter syndrome, that term is real, but the emotions, the things that we experience around it, very, very real and challenging too. Hard to move past.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I kind of agree with you on imposter syndrome. I think it's an overused term. I think a lot of it just comes from, I was actually talking to Director Port about this at one point, and she was like, I just feel like I don't really know, I'm not great with public speaking and presenting. And she has a little side business where she makes bagels. And so I was like, public speaking isn't the issue, because if I asked you to tell me or a crowd of 100 people how to make bagels, you'd be completely fine. Sometimes it's just the lack of understanding or depth of knowledge around a specific topic that makes you a little nervous to step into the spotlight. But I think it's the more that we flex that muscle and share our thoughts and refine our thoughts, it makes it easier to show up again and do it.
Yes, totally. Which is why I think do away with the term imposter syndrome and actually deal with what's going on. Like you just said, it's not
cause, right?
Specifically, it is this, or specifically, it's the system, or a combination of everything. And yes, agreed. Look at us. We already went off on a tangent.
Not shocking. Oh, geez.
Well, before we get too far, tell me a little bit about, first, I want to hear about your journey, where you are today, just a little intro. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about Sales Assembly, because I was telling you earlier, I am very aware of Sales Assembly, have seen the company all over my LinkedIn page for years. But I'm I don't know if I fully know what you all do. So intro on both fronts would be awesome.
Sure. Well, let me start with sales assembly because hopefully that'll be quicker. But essentially, the idea behind sales assembly is that we're here to support and provide enablement and training for go-to-market employees at B2B tech organizations. So, skill development is just hard to come by. There's a lot of competing priorities for go-to-market folks inside an organization. They have to learn product, process, and then beyond that, there's like, are you flexing your muscles to get better at the things that you do on a day-to-day? And sometimes those reps for skill development just don't come as natural as like how to follow your sales process or what this new product is going to bring to this certain ICP, right? There's just so much to learn. So we want to help augment the ability to do skill development for go-to-market employees and make sure that they're still growing in their role, that they're staying up with the ecosystem, what's new and all of that good stuff. And that businesses can really trust us to be that like really quality companion to deliver great skill development training for their go-to-market employees.
That's fantastic. I feel like so many orgs need that and they try to build it out on their own, but they can't.
Sitting in the seat that I sat in at Lessonly, it was really like, it's so frustrating because enablement practitioners in general just really care about people. Like they're coaches, teachers at their core, and they want to see people succeed. And a lot of the time they really get jazzed about skill development, but it's like, it ends up being the last on the list of priority at times of things to do internally. So hopefully we can provide a partner that at least like makes them feel like they're scratching that for their employees or at least delivering something of value to be able to get them moving in the right direction and see that success.
Great. Well, tell me a little bit about you and your journey.
Yeah. So very winding road. I coached women's college basketball for 10 years out of college. I played college basketball and then coached. It was truly passion, like just love the game, love everything about it, and wanted to continue doing it for as long as I could. Learned so much about like coaching, leading, learning, and coaching. I spent a lot of my early days as a coach trying to make people me as a player instead of understanding that the idea of coaching is to make people the best version of themselves. So once that clicked in, was a lot better at my job. But as things progressed, just interviewed for a few head coaching roles. And at the same time I was interviewing for those, had just had my first kiddo. So collegiate coaching is a little more like a lifestyle than it is a profession. There's a lot of blurred lines, a lot of traveling, a lot of late night phone calls. And I just decided it really wasn't the journey that I wanted for my family. So pretty abruptly made the choice to change careers with no real plan. The plan had always been to become a head coach and like do that forever. So when I transitioned in a nonprofit because like everybody wants to help people, right? So that was like the thing that made sense to me. Ran events at one nonprofit and then actually started at a nonprofit that had a tech component to it. And I got to do everything as like employee 7. It was like a startup of all startups with it being nonprofit and a tech component, and just started to fall in love with it, all of the pieces. And as I got my like tentacles into different pieces of the business, I really enjoyed products, some of the like product marketing stuff. And so my brother-in-law was employee 5 at Lessonly, and I had known of them forever. Max and Connor had actually like been in my living room at one point for a baby shower for them. So like had known of Lessonly forever, but just had never really considered a true tech career. So when I was looking to transition, looked at Lessonly and found the services department, which was essentially coaching for software. So felt like a really natural fit. Was able to move up within the organization and then ended up leading that team. Went through the acquisition of Seismic, which was like the coolest learning experience and such a really neat thing. And then had a stint at Demandwell, 6-month boot camp of running enablement, which was amazing. And then was just really fortunate enough to land at Sales Assembly. And it's like, feels like this really cool thesis project of all of the prior experience that I've had. So it just felt like a really natural fit.
That's such a great journey. I have questions and I want to dig into the transition, but I'm curious first, how would you describe your leadership style?
Yeah, it's so funny. I saw this on the prep and I'm not kidding. I went into GPT and like asked what are leadership styles? Because I think this is such an interesting question, right? Because it kind of like, it's the idea that there's assumptive categories of leadership. And I think that there's just such a need to oscillate between them based on the situation. But the 3 that I saw there that I felt like stood out to me were servant leadership, really important to me to be able to be there for people, support people, make sure that like leaders eat last, right? Coaching, I really care about somebody reaching their full potential. So to me, and like investing and seeing potential in people and then helping them get to that place is really important to me. And then the collaboration side of it too, working with cross-functional teammates and making sure that everybody is involved. We're getting ideas from everywhere. I think my aspirational version of leadership style is transformational, and the idea that I'm like high expectations, really pushing people to grow, that we're reaching great outcomes together. That's probably aspirational. I don't think I'm there yet, but trying to achieve that status would be where I'd want to be.
Yeah, I think that those are all really great. And you're right, when it can be an intimidating question because people don't always sit down and really define what is their leadership style. So I think it's an important exercise to go through. And I love hearing everyone's thought process and exactly what you just said. This question made me reflect. This question made me go look up these different leadership theories. And I think they're just that, right? There's a lot of different leadership theories out there, and it's just important for us to understand where we can flex and flow. And one that you mentioned is situational leadership, right? Like that might be where you lean into with all of these components, and you bring who you are into that too, like understanding who you are as a leader, like being a leader, I think is part of it.
Right. And like the first one that popped up was autocratic, right? And I was like, no one would get on a podcast and be like, I'm an autocratic leader, right? Because nobody wants to like beeline through everybody and make decisions without referencing. But like sometimes we all have to be autocratic leaders. There are situations that require us to be like, this is my call and I have to go with it and like trust my gut and not necessarily ask for help and push through it. And so it's like, it really does kind of get you to reflect around like, okay, it really is more about how you show up in the moment and what your priorities are as a leader.
Yes. Yeah. And whoever defines themselves as an autocratic leader, hit me up. Let's do this. I would be so interested to chat with you. Honestly.
I love that.
I would. I mean, it's like parenting too. You have kids. So like my son, I think that we have a very authoritative parenting style where I still bring so much empathy into that and fun and like, but there's boundaries and there's firm decisions that need to be made at certain points. And it's not a discussion. It's not an argument, like we can talk about it. So I'm backtracking on the discussion part, but it's not an argument, right? Like it's not a like,
oh, I love
you
it.
get to do this and I'm like, he tries to fight me on stuff. So like, I have to step into that authoritative role. But yeah, I think it's just flexing and learning how to flow in between and when you need to step up and be able to make those decisions and be more authoritative versus, hey, we're going to do this together. We're going to do this collaboratively and, or somebody else is going to make the decision.
Totally. Yeah. And hit me up if you want to do a parenting podcast, because what you just mentioned, we could probably spend a whole hour talking about that alone.
Yeah. So often do we end up talking about parenting on this podcast because, I mean, I was just talking to a friend actually before this and we were talking about that exact same thing. And she's like, the Venn diagram of parenting and leadership is becoming just one circle.
Yes. The difference being is that for the other humans that you oversee, you leave them at 5 and the others don't leave you ever until they go to bed. So there's just a different like engagement model.
Yeah. And, not children. Will not acknowledge that as obvious as it is, it still needs to be said that these are adults. So it's still the same approach where, hey, if you show up and tell your kid the thing that they're going to do wrong or the thing that they're doing wrong, well, guess what's going to happen? And then if you look at leadership and if you take that position, guess what's going to happen? Or if like you look at parenting and you haven't figured out how to regulate yourself, how to calm yourself down,
100%.
right? And your kids, well, that's not helpful. They're going to mirror you. And your own leadership, all we hear about all day, lead by example. Learn how to posture yourself to where you are regulated so your team can also live that too and see you lead in that way.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, like, yeah, like big feelings are real for adults too, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
I have big feelings every day, right? So
Same.
they may not be about the fact that you're not going to let me do my puzzle at 6:30 a.m., but it's whatever I find as valuable to me as that is to my daughter, right? So, I think it's such an important piece of like, I think some of the things that can get lost in that Venn diagram is that like the people that report to you are people too. They're humans too, and they've got their own stuff and they've got their own lives, and there's stuff going on that you don't know about, and you never know what somebody's situation is. And if you're taking them at surface value as just like a cog in the machine or a pawn at a chess game, like you're doing a disservice to everybody. And so like treating it like parenting is important because you treat your kids like humans, right? Like they're
Yeah.
humans that you care about. And so I think that that's such an important piece of leadership is like treating a whole person, not just who they are from 9 to 5.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree. What is an unpopular opinion that you hold about leadership within our fun tech industry?
Yeah. I think my maybe hot take is that top performers or top ICs are not always the best folks to step into leadership positions. And I think all of us are really inclined to want to see somebody grow, right? Like see them move into a new position, serve a business in a different way. But there's a reason, and I'll date myself with this reference, that Michael Jordan never coached, right? He was, I will go out and say, this is another hot take, the best basketball player of all time, but chose not to coach because it just wasn't the way that he was going to show up best for people. And so I think that there's just this idea that like, because someone is performing well, they're going to be able to step into a leadership role and perform well as a leader. And I think two things are missing from that is just the ability to mold and guide people into being prepared for that type of position. And then just like when you become a parent, you can't really understand it till you get there, of then supporting them with tools and resources once they're in that position, right? I think a disservice to middle management a lot of the time to say like, who's actually ready to sit here? And then once they're there, how are we coming around them and supporting them to make sure they're successful?
Yes, double down on that one. And I would say you hit the nail on the head when it comes to the development gap. You can be so good at your job, so
good.
passionate about your job. But if you don't have the skills to lead people, I mean, it's just a whole different job. It really is. You're not going to be required to do the things that you used to really own and probably be really frenetic about too. if you're a high performer type A personality.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what I'm seeing in certain situations is you get a perpetuation in middle management of like a waste of resources because let's use sales for example. If you're moving great sales folks into leadership positions, they love to sell, right? Like they love that part of the job. So they're finding ways to insert themselves in AE deal cycles because they like to be on the call and they like to build relationships. But essentially, they're not finding ways to kind of collect and share their expertise in a way that doesn't waste time and resources for the organization. And so then you get stuck with this cycle of leaders who are getting too deep, right? And folks that are on the front line that aren't learning enough to then figure out how to propel to the next level. And so I think it can really be a disservice to our organization if there's not that understanding of like who's actually going to excel in taking the knowledge that they have and getting it to other people in a way that's effective and efficient rather than just stepping in and doing for folks.
Absolutely. I was just talking to my mentee about this too. And she's like, where do I want to go? And we were kind of going back and forth because I said, if you are thinking about VP CMO, I would take a different approach. If you're thinking about individual contributor or, director level, very different. And you want to stay there, very different. What you should be doing now is, maybe you do want to learn how to be really tactical, learn how to get your hands through everything and be more of that generalist. But if you want to take the VP CMO track, no, like you need to maybe go deep in one area, and that's like learn your narrative around that, learn how to tell that story. And then you need to focus on how can I enable other people? How can I delegate things to other people? How can I get them to bubble up the information, the right information to me So then I can do some storytelling around that to senior leadership, and I can build relationships, and I can understand the organizational networks, and I can understand how the organization functions as a whole. Like it's a completely different skill set.
It is, and you need growth in different areas, right? Depending on the way that you're going to kind of take your track. And I think that that's been an interesting thing for me to see, just so common in the tech space of like, I love that people promote from within. I think it's great. I think that's amazing. We did a ton of this at Lessonly. I'd love to see people like move up the ranks and stay with a company and have that opportunity. But I also think that there is just, it can turn into a really rough spot for both the individual and the company, right? A lot of these folks, it may be their first experience with management, and then all of a sudden they think that they're not equipped, but maybe the context just wasn't right, or maybe they weren't prepped in the right way. And so you have people who opt out of management forever because of the poor experience, or as a business, you put someone in there and you're afraid because they've been an employee for 8 years. You don't want to like disrupt anything. You want to give them a chance. And so you stick with a less efficient model of coaching, right? So there's just a lot of, and a lack of preparation for these opportunities. I think it ends up showing up in dollars, which is crazy to think about for so many tech companies.
Yeah. I think that the high performer, individual contributor to toxic manager pipeline is very real. It's so real because, yeah, like you can get shit done. Even if you know how to do that storytelling at the executive level, you know what to say, you know how to build relationships. But if you don't know how to lead a team, and if you don't know how to enable those people, if you don't know how to like truly support them and hold them up, that becomes a really sketchy environment.
Yeah, tough place to work in, right? And it's like you probably never intended for it to end that way, but because the narrative that's been pushed is like, just go teach people what you know. And it's like you walk on water. So keep walking on water and tell everybody else how to walk on water.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so much more to management. And so it ends up being a really tough environment for both sides, of both the people on the team and the manager. Of like, I can't imagine that people don't go home at night and be like, why is nobody listening to me? Or like, why do people seem to hate me? You know what I mean? Like there's probably a lot of, kind of back to the term, right? Like you can get to like that imposter syndrome or like root cause moment of like, I think I'm good at my job, but like, why are people not responding? Right. So that's got to be really tough and confusing for those folks. And then to be a report of someone like that, it's like, you're stifled, you're not learning, you don't get experiences, you're not autonomous, right? Like all the things that you kind of hope for in a workplace environment.
If we're thinking about, okay, leaders who are listening that want to heed this advice, right? About being careful about the way that they think about promoting, particularly high performers, promoting from within. How do we avoid this?
Yep. I think the goal is to figure out who's going to raise their hand before the opportunity exists, right? So if you want to promote from within, you should be talking early and often with the people who do report to you about what their aspirations are so that you can help coach them in a way that they're prepared for that, or that they get insight and they realize it's not for them, right? So I think it's really important to give people exposure to things like cross-functional meetings, meeting with cross-functional leaders so that they understand what would be expected from them from a cross-functional leader, from being put on an angry customer call, right? And like, this is what I have to say and how I have to navigate it. And I may full on believe that we have nothing, there's no sword to fall on, but that's where the call ends, right? Like getting to see what the actual meat of that looks like, of being part of escalations, being part of difficult conversations, having to work with cross-functional teammates, having to work with personnel problems, right? Like all of those things are like probably 80% of where you spend your time as a manager. It's not in the glory. I think, a lot of people think that there's this sense of glory that comes with management. Like it is one of the most inglorious jobs there is because you do so much that you're actually never able to show people or tell people about, right? Like so much of your effort is hidden. And so I think it's like helpful to talk to people about what they want and why they want to manage so that you can understand like what's the driver for them. Is it a financial reward? Is it recognition? Is it visibility and access to leadership? Is it because they just really like leading people, right? Like, so there's all of those reasons are valid, but then preparing them to be more rounded for the potential to take that type of position.
Yes, great advice. So it sounds like really looking for who's raising their hand, having those conversations early, learning about their motivations. So then you can set them up on that path to success where they are deep in one area on the leadership spectrum, but they can move across that and still
Yep.
be successful in their leadership role.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even things like role playing a difficult one on one, right? Like if somebody's like super hyped about the financial and visibility side of leadership and be like, great, that's going to be there. Some of those moments are going to be there. Also, I want to share with you this moment. Like, I'm going to come to you and deliver a really like difficult scenario. And I want you to like be on the other side of the table, manage me through it. Right. Like, what does that look like? Because that actually happens really often too. Right. So I think it's like, giving them exposure to the parts of it that may not be as well known. A lot of people assume what management is, but it's very different once you get there.
Yeah, yeah, and, the conflict side of it, I think, is huge. The conflict in managing just high stake conversations and emotionally fueled conversations. I think even just as humans, we're not prepared to handle that with grace. You have to learn.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And I'm still learning,
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what I mean, of how to do these well. There's things that I'm experiencing today that I haven't even experienced in my career yet. Right. So, like, we're in a place where I've had years under my belt and it's still like, okay, this is a new situation. Right. So, it's like things are never really the same day to day. There's, new issues to navigate, new ways to solve problems. And so I think it's just being really comfortable in that as a leader. And I think sometimes it's just not, I don't think people have a full understanding of what management really is when they're like, I want to go that way. Right. So I think it's really important for exposure.
Yeah, and even just thinking the way we've been socialized, right? First you do this, and it's you climb up this ladder, and you become a manager, and
Yes.
it's like, there's just so much more
Yes.
to it, so much more to it. It sounds like you're putting into place some really great strategies to ensure that people fully understand what it means and understand the areas that they need to dive into and, be adept at in order to be effective and both ways, right? Like upwards and downwards
Yep.
in terms of leadership.
Yeah, for sure.
Thinking about this has been a big topic. I mean, it always has. I've been harping on burnout for a long time, have
Hmm.
gone through my own experiences, as I'm sure you have as well. But
Yep.
it's top of mind for 99% of my clients are struggling
Yep.
with burnout or have struggled with burnout, are concerned about it coming back. And I just don't think that our industry does us any favors with, I would say
Mm-mm.
hustle culture is a little bit quieter these days than it used to be, but even still, like the grind, man, it's still tough. And I think even hearing some of the conversations around like back to office, like there's
Yep.
just a lot of it's very fueled. It's very fueled that conversation. Where do you think we are in terms of burnout as an industry, and where should we be going? What should we be doing to really make it a little bit more sustainable for people?
Yeah. I mean, first from like a real like zoomed out macro level, I just like definitely want to shout out Gen Z. Like as a older millennial, I think there's like hustle culture was just how I was raised, right? Like if you're not active, something's wrong. Like your hands shouldn't be idle. And I do feel like there is a shift in the tide from the younger generation of like, why does work have to look like this? And, I think all of us older millennials, will speak for myself, are benefiting from the fact that like work is having to change because of the new, folks that are having to fill seats at organizations. So I think there's a good trend from like a socioeconomic standpoint that's happening and a generational standpoint. But I do feel like tech specifically, particularly with the economic conditions and the way they are, I was actually just chatting with a friend about this morning. I had so much latitude at less than late to fail, like so much, right? Like I was trying things and failing and trying to innovate and trying to be better. And there was so much patience and grace for me to do those things that resulted in me getting to a better spot, right? But with the macroeconomic conditions, I feel like a lot of that's gone, right? It's like we have to provide results tomorrow. There needs to be, we have to close deals, we have to retain customers. Like we can't wait for you to figure this out. We need you to be productive right now. And I think that's a lot of the underlying white noise that we're feeling right now is just like it all has to be done now. We're trying to like literally save businesses or not get laid off or
Yeah.
so it like it's this white noise that's happening that's just causing us to kind of get back into this like, am I doing enough? Do they think I'm doing enough? Like kind of mind frame. And so I think like a lot of it to me from what's being experienced right now goes back to the mindset and the culture that's built at an executive level, right? Of like, is there psychological safety? Do they have a culture of learning? Is there going to be an opportunity for someone to mess up and fail and try to innovate and figure out a new way to do something or have that latitude? And I think that it's just like a lot less common right now, which is hard to see, right? Just with the way the state of tech is. I just feel like a lot of it is influenced from like economic pressures right now, which is maybe a little different than it used to be, where it was like maybe more people pressure or like, just the culture. I think it's actually more on the economic side and people fearful for solvency of businesses and losing their jobs, that sort of thing, which is really hard to solve for. That's like a hard thing to figure out. Even I've talked about this with coworkers that have left Lessonly, and are no longer there. We were all just so bought in, right? Like there was just like this level of joy and excitement about the work. And we all had this common mission. I look back on it so fondly as a place and an experience that like, I know I'll never be able to replicate, but I also have like tried to look like rose-colored glasses, right? Like everything, like you just suddenly forget all of the problems that existed when you were there because they did. But one of the things that I know for sure that happened, I was at Lessonly during COVID and I lost all sense of boundaries at work, and it was hard to figure out how to get back to a more appropriate boundary setting at work. And so that's something I've been really intentional about in subsequent jobs of like, okay, I want to show up as my best. I'm going to give them everything that I have, but the everything that I have is also going to be between very specific work hours, right? And so I think there's just this need to, I think a lot of people call it like balance or work-life integration, whatever it might be, but it's like, you just have to figure out how those things coexist in your life in a healthy way. And if you're at a place where you feel like that coexistence comes into jeopardy, then it's probably not a good long-term fit, and I think that that's hard for people to sometimes digest, but I also think you have to like be prepared that it lives on a sliding scale too, right? Like it's good to put the boundaries in, but sometimes projects require you to work late. And then sometimes doctor's appointments require you to start work later. So it's like, you just have to figure out what that sliding scale looks like and live in a comfortable space. And then just find a place where people give you the autonomy and safety to say like, I'm not concerned about this person. Like as long as the results are being delivered, I'm not going to micromanage like when they're in the office or online.
Yeah, wherever they are. But it sounds like finding that baseline, that norm where, yes, there are exceptions to that, but you always come back to your baseline and your norm and making sure that that's appropriate and it's healthy and it allows you to scale in a safe way. And to your point, I think that that's what Gen Z is doing. And I think that they're just doing it in a way where they see what happens. They don't want to go through burnout just so they can be like, never mind, that was shitty. Right. They don't want to learn the lesson. They just want to, come at it from a thoughtful, safe, like scalable approach, which I think is the direction we generally need to move in terms of, thinking about balance.
Yeah. I mean, truthfully, in all of the times that I have felt out of whack or out of balance with work and life, if I reflect on it, I guarantee that like 90% are self-generated. That it was like, I assumed something or I didn't plan appropriately or like reflecting on it a lot of the time, it was my own need to please somebody else or whatever it was that generated, nobody's expectation was there for me to do the thing. And the 10% that it was somebody else's expectation, like I've learned to understand, like, I can tell those people to kick rocks, right? Like, I can go find somewhere else. But like, the work is actually mostly needs to be done with me. And like, how do I make sure that I'm comfortable with my boundaries and I'm not going to like overreact to somebody's response to that boundary? And that's, I think, the hard part is like actually getting yourself to like quiet the noise. I think, particularly as women, there's just this idea that like overachieve gets you into the C-suite, right? Like, and I just think that that's a slippery slope, right? To take that tactic. So for me, it's more about finding the right organizations that appreciate the right type of work. And so I think that that's sometimes that feels like the needle in the haystack, to figure out where that exists. But I feel really fortunate to have been in a lot of places where that's been the case. So
Yeah, very lucky. That's great that you've had that experience. But I love that you're just highlighting the fact that, make those definitions, those boundaries for yourself so then you can find that place. You're not just looking for a job that you like. You actually have some guardrails around that.
yeah, my sister gave me the best piece of advice when I was leaving nonprofit and heading into tech. She was like, quit looking at jobs, like quit looking at what you want to do and start looking at where you want to be. And it really has like changed my perspective on the way that I look at opportunities. It's like, I'm much more concerned with what the company brings to the world, how they operate, what their culture looks like, and way less concerned about what my particular role is going to be at that place. Because the bottom line is like, if I see a crack in the door and I can find my way in it, I believe in myself enough to get to the place that I want to be. Right. But it's, for so long, I was looking for like that perfect like job description, right? Like, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. But it just doesn't exist, right? Like and so for me, I've completely changed my process when thinking about like what's next in career trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't exist. It's because like you are so unique too. You are going to be the piece that makes it exist. You and a
Mm-hmm.
combination of the right place, the right people, the right time, plus you.
Yep.
So yeah, it doesn't exist maybe yet, maybe until you're in it and you see it. What is a leadership topic that you believe people aren't talking about as often as they should be or as openly
Yeah.
as they should be?
It kind of comes back to like what we were talking about earlier in terms of helping folks like promoting within. But I don't think people talk about why they're in leadership enough. Like, add to other leaders, to their direct reports, to their manager who's going to help them to the next step. I think people avoid this conversation because they're just like, well, I don't want to seem greedy. If it was like, I just want to get promoted or I want to make more money, right? But I think actually being honest with yourself and reflecting about those things provides you the like reality check that you need to understand, where do I need to grow and who do I need to hire, right? Because like the person who thinks that they can do it all on their own is never going to be a great manager. So that's just like, that's moot, right? But if you can recognize as a leader, like, I'm in it for these reasons, so I need to find like complementary pieces over here that like are good at this thing, can execute on this thing, or like think about things in this way, it's going to make me more rounded as a leader because I can learn and grow from them, right? Where I think people are just have a hard time reflecting on like, why do I get up and do this every day? And like actually be honest about it. Because I mean, honestly, I'm sure you would say the same thing too. Of like, there are some days when I wake up and I'm like, no, like I don't want to do this today. I want a full work day where I don't have to talk to anybody and talk about anybody's problems or needs or solve any like outstanding issues for anybody. I just want to put my head down and do a thing. And so I think it's really helpful to be honest with yourself of like, why are you doing it? So that you can make sure that you're reminding yourself of that when you need to be motivated, and then helping yourself grow in the places that you're either, you have shortcomings, or that that needs to be a place that's filled on the team. And I don't know why. I just think people are afraid to be realistic or honest about why they got into management. I think a lot of the time people, I love people and I want to help. And I think a lot of that's true sometimes, but like, you wouldn't stay there if that was like the only reason, because it's not that glorious. It's not that easy, right? So it's like, yes, you are helping people, but helping people becomes incredibly difficult. There's so many challenges, roadblocks, things that you have to work through. If that's like your core, it's unlikely that you're going to stay, right? So like, what are the other things that are really pushing you to be in the spot that you're in? And I think that really helps drive the tough days. Like for me, I feel really responsible, both from my experience. So in athletics, Mike Krzyzewski was an incredible coach at Duke for men's basketball. And he built what people now use as a term in coaching, which is a coaching tree. So he's had assistant coaches, players underneath him who have just gone out and done incredible things in the world, right? That he's built this coaching tree, he's left a legacy. For me, that drives me. So I feel indebted to Matt Theodore and Connor Burt to go spread the good news of Lessonly across the world and what we learned there and all the tools and resources they gave us, and be able to share those with other people. Because like, man, if you don't know they exist, I got news for you and it's awesome. And then the other side of it is just, I feel responsible for like leaving things better than I found them. So helping somebody be the best version of themselves. That's the stuff that drives me. Like, yes, I want to help people. Yes, I want to like get them into a good space, but like my charge is to leave that legacy and to help people, you know, kind of see the greater ways to do things that I've learned, and I want to share that with them. And that's what gets me through the tough days.
I'm so glad that you opened that door and then you walked through it, because I was going to invite you to walk through and be like, well, okay, so Alex, then what's your why?
Yeah, right? Because it is. I mean, and it's okay. Like, it is totally okay if your reason is to get a paycheck. Like,
Yeah.
I think that that's awesome, but own it, right? Like, own it and know it, and then figure out how to exist within that. Because like, getting that paycheck then needs to be motivating enough for you to get through the tough times, or like start the day that you don't want to start. So there's got to be pieces of it that you can feel like connected to. And so I think it's just really good to own and know why you stepped into the position.
I think that's such a fantastic topic, and I cannot wait to cut that clip and throw it out on social and ask people, like, tell us in the comments why. Like, what is
Like
your
real
why
talk,
for leadership?
right?
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. And that's,
I love it.
I think it's great. I think it helps start a conversation that makes you better at what you do, which is, I mean, everybody wants that, right? To be able to like show up as your best self. And the easiest way to do that is just be realistic.
Yeah. Well, thank you for opening that door for this conversation, and hopefully for other leaders to really reflect on that. And we'll ask them, what's your why? Be real. As we wrap up, what would be a key piece of advice or a resource or some sort of experience that you really believe leaders need to go through or read, or like whatever it is, whatever the resource is, what would you want to leave them with?
I tell people this when they step into management for the first time, because like, I am not a guru, but I have found help in two very specific places. The first one was a book called The Making of a Manager by Julie Zhou. She was an early product reader at Facebook. And so she wrote the book in her 30s, I think, after becoming a leader at 26. And so it's not like nothing against this, but it's not like the old white guy version of like, I've been there before and like, this is what a good manager looks like. It's like the failed, flawed version of like, I did this wrong and here's what I've learned. And like, here's where you keep thinking and pushing. And she breaks it down to purpose, people, and process. And it's just like a really simple way to think about management. So that book was incredibly helpful. The other one was Google Rework, which I feel like is like a gold mine that not a lot of people know about, but there's just so many great assets on there about like building a team vision and how to lead. And they're just like templates and small trainings and things that are free for anybody to access. There's even stuff about like unbiasing on there. So it's like a really helpful piece of one-on-one template. So as I was stepping into a leadership role for the first time, I was just like, I don't have any of the bag of tricks. Like I need some things to get started. And it wasn't like I used them verbatim, but it was a really helpful like thought starter for me to get going.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I don't think I've ever been on that, but oh, that's a fantastic resource. Both of those. I've heard of Julie's book before, and I've also heard that it's quite a good read. And, you know, I do have some things against the typical white male trajectory, and I'm glad that that book is a recommendation instead of, you know, the former.
Yeah. And, you know, like I've read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and it is a lovely, awesome book, right? But like sometimes it's really easy to provide what feels like absolute guidance when you're late in your career and you're like, have experienced all the things. Like, I love that she wrote it from like a raw place of like, I'm still learning. This is what I learned. These were all the mistakes. Like this, it's just a much more approachable way to read a management book because you can see yourself in it rather than like oh my gosh, like this is here and I'm here. And like, how do I close the gap? Right. Like
Mhm.
sometimes you read those leadership books and it's like, okay, that sounds like utopia. And I'm so far from that. So like, what's step one? Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a really helpful book for me to be like, okay, other people mess up with this too. And she learned and she's getting better. And it was just a helpful read for me to see myself in it.
I love it. Well, we will add those to the show notes. And
Yeah.
thank you so much. This has been lovely. It's been great to
Yeah.
connect with you, hear your stories and your journey. And I think you've got some great, I'm gonna call them hot takes, but I don't know that they're yes, it's like yes, that this should be the way. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing them with me, and I know our listeners will be amped to learn from you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It was great to just chat and appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope you walk away with something empowering that you can take into your own leadership journey. Are you a high-performing executive looking to take your career to the next level? Or maybe you're an emerging leader who wants to develop the skills you need to advance in your role and show up authentically. Or maybe you're experiencing burnout and struggling to find a better work-life balance. Whatever your situation is, one-on-one coaching can help you achieve your personal and professional goals. If you're interested in experiencing the power of coaching for yourself, head on over to hypehousecoaching.com/start coaching now, where you can set up a one-on-one leadership and executive coaching intro session for free. Remember, the only hype that really matters is the hype within.